Hello, and welcome to Paint Along Studios TV. Today we'll be painting Golden Crush. We're going to need some supplies. We will be using some paper towels, some water for cleaning our brushes, some styrofoam plates, and some painter's tape today. We'll also need some liquid acrylics. We'll need some white, some deep yellow, burnt sienna, Mars black, phthalo blue, phthalo green. We'll also need some brushes, a number 10 Filbert brush, a number 2 fan brush, a number 6 round brush, a number 0 script brush. Let's start with the number 10 Filbert brush. We're going to need 1 scoop of white and a dab of deep yellow, so a very light yellow. Then we'll make a slightly darker yellow, so a big scoop of deep yellow, just mix it with a little part of your pile. Start with the deep yellow. Okay, we're going to come to the canvas. We're going to divide the painting in half. Okay, and then I'll thicken the line just a little bit. I want to make it about at the halfway mark, and then I want to start working my way up. I'm going to switch to the lighter color, add some to the top. I want those colors to blend a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little extra white, a little extra lighter color to the top again. I'm going back and forth trying to get the colors to blend. You can even wipe your paper towel out a little bit and go with a fairly empty paper brush. Go back and forth to fade the color out. Clean the brush, pound it up and down in the water. Take 2 paper towels and squeeze all the water out. We're using liquid acrylic, already has the perfect amount of liquid in there. Alright, let's get a blue now. We want to get a scoop of white and a little dab of the phthalo blue. So we want a very light blue. Leave a little bit of space above our yellow line and start filling in the entire top of the canvas with this very light blue color. We're going to be connecting it to our yellow glow through the use of white. So we're going to be lightening the blue until it gets really close to where the yellow begins, but we don't want it to touch. So I'm going to wipe some of the blue out. I'm going to get some extra white. I'm mixing it right on top of the blue while it's wet so it lightens it a little bit. And I will keep wiping my brush and then refilling it with blue, or white I mean. I want the blue to fade, so I would like to add more and more white to my color. Fade it more and more. I'm going back and forth multiple times so it fades at the bottom. And I'm going to clean my brush. And I'm going to go ahead and get a new color. I would like a scoop of white, a scoop of phthalo blue, a scoop of phthalo green. So equal amounts of each of those, white, blue, and green, mix them together. Then we want to get a big scoop of phthalo blue, a big scoop of phthalo green, so a darker shade as well. And then we want to get one more shade, a very dark shade. We want to get a scoop of Mars black, a scoop of phthalo blue, and a scoop of phthalo green. Okay, wipe some of the paint out of your brush and start with the lightest color. I'm using my brush to measure the metal part plus the bristles somewhere along the right side towards the top. Make a nice chunky line. And then I want to curve upwards towards the top of the canvas and then curve back down as I get close to that left side edge. I want to cross over on top of that yellow down there. And then I want to start really curving down. I want to get about halfway down. See that? I have about equal amount of space from the yellow line on the top and on the bottom. Then I want to start filling in. This is going to be my wave, so I want to start filling it in with this nice solid color. Again, I'm using the lightest shade. I'm going to be adding some of the darker shade as I travel down, but start at the top and fill in a big, huge chunk all along the top area. Okay, a little bit towards the bottom as well, a big old smear right there. Definitely get the curve, and then we want to get the medium color and start working our way down. Okay, so I'm going to start filling in with the medium color, all this kind of area down here. I'm not quite getting to the bottom or the edges yet, except maybe at this top edge. Then I'm going to start really getting the darker colors in this bottom left corner and also the bottom right area. and I'm making sure all the colors are wet and mixing a little bit. If they're not mixing, if they're just covering up each other, make sure you don't have too much paint in your brush. Wipe some out if you need to. Use the brush as a tool. Don't add more paint, just smear with your brush. Okay, I got a little bit in this corner. I'm also going to come back and add some to the curve of the wave up here. Okay, I'm letting it really mix with this color. So even though I'm using the darkest color, it's mixing with that wet color. I like to make it a tiny bit darker as well around that edge at the top. Okay, I need to save some of those colors, so make sure you have some left, but I'm going to get a scoop of white and a scoop of blue, a little dab of phthalo green. Okay, so I kind of clean my brush or wipe it. I want this to be a little bit more blue than turquoise. This is going to be the watercolor for the background. I'm going to fill the whole little space in, okay, all this little white area, not the sky, make sure it's below the yellow. Okay, and then I'm going to take some of the other colors and smush it into the color. I'm going to smear it back and forth, let some of those turquoisey colors mix in with it. It's still on the blue side. I'm also going to add a little smear of white and just kind of work it into that color. I'm using a back and forth stroke to try to work it into that color. Okay, I'm going to add some wiggles to the wave. So I went back to the colors I had before. I'm using the darkest shade and I'm going to wiggle, wiggle, wiggle a little bit along the bottom. Still trying to get the colors to blend in slightly. So I might grab some of the medium color, try to fade out some of that dark. But I want to get a bit of a bumpy edge along the bottom, wherever it kind of overlaps on top of the water in the background. You can even mix a little bit with the color. See how it's getting a tiny bit lighter? Okay, I want to add a little bump along the top of the wave as well with this nice dark color. The paint's a little bit drier now, but I'm still trying to get it to blend just a little bit. Remember, you can go back to those other colors. I want to put some all along the edges, and I would like to fade it out. So I'm wiping some paint out of my brush, trying to get the paint to mix with the paint underneath, reactivate it. I can put a little smear here and there of this color, and then I'm going to clean that brush. I'm going to leave it in the water, switch to the fan brush. Now I'm really going to start getting fancy with all these colors. I'm going to create some movement within the wave. I'm starting with the medium color, and I'm doing some nice, very thin lines, okay? So use the back of the plate to practice. You don't want to get the fat lines, you want to get some thin little swipes. And I'm following the curve of the wave. So I'm using the medium color. I'm working mainly in the light areas of the painting. Okay, and I'm following whatever curve I kind of gave myself. Up here, I'm really going to get a nice little, almost curvy circle going on. I'm only going to curve along this side though. The rest of it, I'm just going to follow the outer edges. So I'm just going to either curve a little to the side or a little down, depending on what edge I'm closest to. I can also add some light back. If I have too many of that medium color, I can add back a few little light strokes too. That's the nice thing about having big piles of each of those colors. You can move back and forth between them. I like to kind of blend it out. I like the colors, while they're wet, to kind of mix together, but I want to have a few strokes of the lighter color as well. A little bit here and there. You can even make it a little bit lighter. You can add a little extra white if you want to, just so it shows up nicely. We're going to use the dark color now. The dark color, we're going to stay in the dark zone. And you'll notice that it actually looks a little darker than our actual dark color, and that's because that color was mixing with some of the other colors. This one is pretty solid though. It's had a little bit of time to dry. But we're going to stick mainly to the dark areas. You can venture a little bit into the medium zone. But again, we're following the same sort of directional lines of each of the edges. Okay, so a little bit here, a little bit there. I'm going to start using this dark color to break up the wave. And I'm going to do this by dabbing. I'm going to poke, 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 poke along the very top edge. And then I'm going to slowly sort of do a few little swipes that pull away from the wave, right where it curves, right where that extreme curve is. And then it's going to lead into that top part of the wave. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing down here. I want it to get a little bit pokey, a little bit bumpy along the bottom as well. Okay, add a little extra right here along the right side. I want to add some different sort of blues going on in here, so I might just have some white and some blue mixed together. Make sure they're all relatively medium colors, not too dark, not too light, but have a few different shades going on. You can even get into some greens if you want, but I'm just going to add some blues because I had a lot of green in my turquoises. But I'm mostly using it to kind of lighten some of the darker lines just a little bit and let it mix a little bit with it. But I want to put a little bit here, a little bit there. I'm kind of spreading it out, creating different zones for these colors. Then you want to wipe that brush back and forth, dry it off. And we'll need a clean plate. That one's pretty full of color. Unless you're a very neat person, you'll need a clean plate. And we're going to go ahead and switch to our number 6 brush. We want to get 2 scoops of white, maybe 3. 2 scoops of deep yellow. Okay, I'm going to put it over here to the side so I still have some of that white left. And I'm going to wipe some of this yellow out of my brush, and I want to create a little pile of black for myself to use. I'm going to start getting my sunlight in there. I'm also going to create a nice silhouetted island. Clean your brush, stir it around, let it touch the bottom of the glass, wipe the water on a paper towel. You want to start with that clean white, so make sure your brush is very clean. Okay, so just get the nice clean white, create a little sun. Okay, a little circle, half of it's on the very deep yellow, half of it's on the lighter yellow. And then you want to go very gently back and forth on the water's edge, creating these little reflective lines. We are going to be switching to the smaller brush, the number 0 script brush. So you can go ahead and switch to that, especially if you want to get some thinner lines. I like to start out with a few thicker ones and then I go back and add some thinner ones. And we're also going to be tinting some of them yellow, but you want to start with the white first, and that's because yellow is a very delicate color. It won't go over top of blue easily. But now I'm switching to yellow, and I'm working right on top of some of the white lines that I already have. So I'm not really making new lines, I'm basically tinting some of my original lines that are already there. I'm going to go ahead and make sure this area is dry, and then I'm going to grab my painter's tape. I want it a little bit longer than my canvas, and I want to make sure a little bit of the blue water is above the blue painter's tape. I'm going to be working along the top edge of the painter's tape. I want to get some black in the number 6 brush, the round brush. So I'm going to start working along it. I'm staying away from the wave, but I'm taking my brush, letting it go all the way across, painting both the tape and the canvas at the same time, and then I will work my way up slightly. I want to create a little bit of a silhouetted island along the horizon line, and I like to kind of cup my sun, but you can leave it far away as well, but I like to have a little tiny bump on one side and then a little tiny bump on the other side that comes up and kind of cups the sun just a little bit. And then I like to sort of go back and just sort of add a little bit of bumpy texture to the entire edge of my little silhouetted island. Being very careful to leave most of my sun, just a little bit of it can get covered up. Just like that. Okay, again, I'm avoiding my wave. Stick that brush in the water, stir it around. I'm going to take that painter's tape off, but go ahead and dry that brush first. Then take the tape off. Okay, so we're going to be working down here on the silhouette of our sea turtle. We want to use white to make the whole thing. We're using the full length of the brush, or just the handle actually, not the full length, so just where the metal starts all the way to the tip. Make a line, leave some space at the bottom, some space at the top, and you're going to add a circle towards the right side of it, about the size of a tangerine, and then kind of curve your way back to the other edge of the line. See how it gets a little narrow towards the back? Okay, and then add a little bit of a curved line along the bottom. This will be the basic shape of the shell. Go ahead and fill that entire shell in. To make his head and his little flippers, you're going to use a little bit of black. It's going to be a very, very light gray. Just so it's a little bit different. We're going to be actually tinting it the right colors in a minute here. But go ahead and just add a tiny bit of black to this color, just so that it's slightly different in shade. I want to make a little circle right here in the front, and from that, that's where I'm going to start my neck. I'm going to have a little tiny line that comes out into the water, and then I'm going to curve the top of it. That'll be the top of the head. The bottom line will tilt down just a little bit, and it will be more flat. So curve on top, flat on the bottom. I like to have his little nose kind of pointing a little bit down in the painting. Okay, so a little bit like that. And I want to fill that in. And again, it's just a slightly different color than the white, just so I can tell where one part starts and the other starts. I'm going to have his little arms right here. I'm going to use my brush to measure. I'm going to have a little tiny line kind of poke out of his shell, and then I want it to curve up the full length of the brush, or just the handle actually. You'll have to kind of gauge that. Usually I start with the handle, and then I'll add a little bit of a tip to the top of it, kind of tilting back. Remember to get it nice and curved, okay? It's curving a little bit to the left side, and then you want to fill it in. Again, it's just a slightly different color than the shell, so you can kind of tell it apart. Fill it all the way in, and then we want to get the other little fin. The other little fin is kind of behind him, so it's going to come out of his head slightly. We want to make a little tiny curved line. This will be a little bit shorter than that one, because most of it is behind the turtle. I like about half the length of my brush if you really want to measure, but again, it's kind of a triangle shape. It comes to a little bit of a point. See that? It's about half the length of the other one. The other one was just the handle part of the brush. This one's a little bit smaller. Then we want to get his back legs. They're very short, and they're just kind of trapezoid shapes, meaning two slanted lines, and then it's wider at the bottom, and I like to connect it with a little bit of a wiggly line. And then go ahead and fill it in. Okay, so see that? A little bit slanted, extend away from each other, and then you want to fill it in. Let's go ahead and get the real colors for the turtle now that we have our silhouette all set up. So go ahead and come back to your mixing plate. We're going to get 2 scoops of white, 1 scoop of deep yellow, a little dab of burnt sienna. So this is going to be kind of our head and our limbs. Then we want to get a scoop of deep yellow, a scoop of white, a little dab of phthalo green. This will be the shell, so it'll just be slightly more green in color. Wipe your brush off and start by filling in the head and the limbs with the slightly more yellow color, not the green one. Go ahead and fill in his head, fill in his little flippers in the front. Go right along the edges. Make sure your white is fairly dry. We want it to sit on top of the white, not really mix with it. We would just like nice bright colors for our sea turtle, so we did a layer of white. I like to add a little bit of a jagged edge along this right side of the fin. Along the fin that's on the right side, though, I want to have the jagged edge on the opposite side. I want it along the top or along the left side. Just a little tiny bump right there. Okay, I switched to the greenish color, the one that's just a little bit more on the green side. I'm doing the whole back fins and also the whole shell. Okay, so this color is just a little bit more green. It's very slight, though. You can make it more extreme. You can tint it a little bit more green if you want. I like it just a slight difference in shade. All right, we're going to go ahead and make our shadow version of this color. We're going to start with the green. We're going to add a scoop of yellow, a little scoop of phthalo green, and a little scoop of burnt sienna. So we're making this color darker for our shadow areas. Okay, I'm going to wipe my brush out. I don't have to clean it, but I do want to squeeze some of the paint out. I'm going to add a scoop of white, a scoop of deep yellow, and a scoop of burnt sienna to the yellowish color. That will be my shadow color for that. I'm also going to add a tiny little pinch of Mars Black in there, just to make it just a tint more dark. I'm going to start with the yellow one since I just finished mixing it, and I want to come along this left side of my big fin, and I'm letting it mix with the wet paint. If it's not really mixing, you can kind of use your finger to kind of blend it in slightly. I'm coming at the bottom slightly, but mostly along that left side of the first little fin. I'm also going to add a little bit extra between the head and this other limb here. Okay, and then a little bit along the bottom of his head. I'm again going to rub it just a little bit so it blends into the yellow easy. Okay, again I want to divide this, so I'm going to add a little extra right where the shell starts too. And I'm going to divide his face from his little arm. So I want to add a little tiny line right there and then rub it slightly. Then switch to the darker green one. We want to add a little bit darker green to the bottom part of his shell. His back flippers will also be mostly the dark green. You don't have to completely fill them in. I like to rub most of it into there. And then just a little extra smear at the back, kind of rubbing it with your finger, and then just towards the bottom of the shell, so right where it kind of sits on top of his head and neck area. Let's switch plates. I want to get another clean plate, or if you're neat, you can stick to that same one. You want to get your fan brush, get some white and some yellow. Okay, we're going to be adding some sunlight to our wave, so give the turtle a little time to dry. Start with the white though. You want to sprinkle some sunlight into the wave, so I'm sticking mainly to the very edge of the wave. I'm separating my bristles so that they have a little bit of space between them. You do this by having less paint or just kind of pushing it against the side of the plate to separate. I'm sprinkling some white into the very edge of our wave, so the part of the wave that's touching the sky slightly. And it can come a little bit outside of the wave, but it's mainly going to stay in the wave or at least touching it. Okay, got a little bit of sea foam kind of popping out right there with some white. Try playing with different amounts of white. You can also do a few little swipes like this as it comes down. You can have a few little swipes. So go back and forth between little swipes and little sprinkles. I usually have less paint in my brush while I'm doing this, so that the little smears and little swipes, little sprinkles will be a little bit softer, less dark, or less solid looking, I mean, with the white. Less blobby. I like it to look very delicate, a little bit see-through even. Okay, I'm coming into the wave slightly. I'm just following the kind of movement that I gave myself earlier. I'm going to come down here in this dark area right along the edge of the water, sprinkle a whole bunch of this white there. And again, I have very little in my brush. I'm going to add a few swipes down here. I'm going to rub them just a little bit. Then I want to switch to the yellow. I like to make the yellow kind of match the sky yellow, so that kind of deeper yellow. So I might go back and have a little extra yellow in my brush. And I'm just going anywhere I kind of have some white, not overlapping all of it, but just kind of sprinkling it here and there. Okay, so a little swiping, a little sprinkling. You can go back and forth. I can rub just a little bit. It can mix with the white or just sit on top of it. Okay, having some come into the sky. A little bit here and a little bit there. I'm switching back to my little tiny brush. Okay, I dried it and I cleaned it. I want to get 2 scoops of burnt sienna, a small scoop of Mars Black. Okay, this is what I'm going to use for some of my details in my turtle. I'm also going to make some for my shell. I'm going to get 2 scoops of burnt sienna, 1 dab of Mars Black, and 1 dab of Phthlo green. So this is also a very dark color, but it's a slightly more green color. You want to start with the one that's slightly more brown. I'm going to make his little eye and some markings in his face. I make a little tiny line and then I curve the top and the bottom. I like it to come to a little bit of a point, and I like the point to the end of his nose. So I might make a little line that comes down just a little bit more and then curve the top and the bottom. I also want to block off where his little beak area is. I make a little line and then I'm pushing the paint towards that little point. It's almost like a triangle shape. Re-wet the area if it doesn't quite smear. I'm re-wetting it and smearing it just a little bit. It doesn't have to fill it in. We're going to create some markings all around his eye. They're not very specific. They're just some different shapes, usually small shapes kind of curving around his eye. I might do one at the top that looks more like a pentagon and kind of fill it in, but everywhere else I'm going to be having just some different, almost like puzzle piece shapes. So don't shape it like specifically a puzzle piece, but what I mean by that is having some lines that kind of fit together. Have some wrinkles in his neck area and a little bit around his arm that's in the front there. And then go back and start filling in his face with even more little freckles. Have them kind of squished together. See this? I'm going back and making that one a little bigger so it kind of puzzle pieces and fits in with the other ones. Okay, again, I want it to curve around, so I'm going to curve this around so it goes around his eye. I'm going to put one right at the edge of his head, lining up with the edge, so I can definitely tell where his head stops and his fin starts. On the fins, you're going to make these markings a little bit bigger, and I'm going for kind of some trapezoid shapes, some triangle shapes, but they're going to be a whole lot bigger. I like to put them at the edges of the fins first, and then I like to puzzle piece my way by filling in the centers with some little pieces. They can get very close to the other little sections. You don't want them to really touch, but it's okay if it occasionally happens. There's a lot of them. You won't really notice too much. If it really bothers you though, you can always merge two shapes together and just have a nice big one. For the big fin though, I want to leave a little bit of this yellow edge here, so I won't push those shapes right up against that edge along the right side. The other edge, the one on the left, is fine. I can put the shapes right up against that. I like to leave a tiny little edge right there. And it's okay if you don't remember. We're going to be coming with a little highlight color later. But this is just to remind myself that I need to put that little highlight on the big fin just along that right side. But I'm filling up it with different shapes. Again, puzzle piecing them together, getting them really close together, either by adding a little tiny one between any extra space or just making the existing shapes a little bit bigger and a little bit tighter fitting. There's a whole lot of them. Feel free to remix this color if you run out. Again, it's 2 scoops of that burnt sienna and 1 scoop of Mars black. Okay, and we're just doing the front flippers and the face. Okay, we want to switch colors. Once we're done adding those little freckles, those little shapes, switch to the one that's a little bit more green. We're going to be adding some shapes to our turtle shell. We're going to be adding a hexagon-like shape or a pentagon-like shape, either one. And I'm not filling the whole thing in. I'm sort of touching it and smearing it in with my finger. Then I'm going to fit some shapes that fit around it. This one turned out to be a pentagon. This one's going to be a hexagon though. Okay, I won't see the entire shape. I'm making little parts of it, whatever fits. Okay, so I'm kind of piecing them together, getting them really close together. Those nice little angled lines. I can fit a little tiny one up here, and I'm rubbing it to try to fill it in just a little bit. It doesn't have to fill in all the way. I want to create a darker line down here to divide the shell from those little fins at the bottom. Okay, and then I'll just give a little glimpse of some shapes down here. They don't have to be too specific or anything. Again, just rubbing a little bit. I'm going to get a few smears of this darker color inside of those back fins. I want the back fins to mostly turn pretty dark, but they can have the impression of having little markings on them. Not really specific markings though. I'm going to go back, add a little extra brown here. I also want to add a little extra. This is the same color we used for the freckles in the turtle and his eye. I also want to add a little bit to his neck area, so I'm going to put a little tiny bit and smear it. And I can also add a tiny bit back in his little beak area if I want to. Okay, I'm going to clean my brush. I want to get my little white one. I want to do a little smear under his eye. Little smear of white, and then I'll do a solid looking oval kind of at the top just to make his eye look nice and shiny. Okay, and like I mentioned before, you can do a little touch up in his beak if you want, make it a little darker. I like to just add a little shadow at the bottom, not making a mouth, so I'm going to make sure it lines up with the bottom and just kind of smear it in there. Alright, I'm going to be using my red handle brush, and I'm just going to be using some white and maybe a tiny bit of blue. And I'm going to be using a paper towel. Make sure you have one ready because we're going to smear this color. Make sure all of the turtle parts are dry at this point, but I'm adding a little bit to the top of each of the fins and I'm smearing it with the paper towel. It's almost like an underwater glow. Okay, kind of giving a little bit of a bluish tint on the big one. I'm going to do it along the underside or the most left side of his flipper. It's catching some of the reflective blue in there. Clean the brush after that though. The rest of the kind of shine marks we want to add are going to be just with the white. But we're still using that paper towel method. I'm going to put a tiny bit at the top of his head. I'm going to use my finger for some of these smaller parts. I'm going to add a little bit to the shapes that are closest to the top of his shell. And again, I'm smearing it to kind of get this kind of foggy sort of look, and then I'll do a big kind of smear on top. Just add a little extra glow, and I want to add a little edge of this white, or you can even add a little bit of yellow to it. Okay, on the part of the flippers that is closest to the sun. So it's almost like we're catching a little bit of that sunlight on his flippers. Okay, just a little bit here and there. Maybe a little bit in his neck. Let's get a little close-up of our painting. Look at all those cool details. So we got our wonderful water in there, our adorable little turtle with the sunlight glowing on his back and a little bit on his flippers. I think we did a good job. So join us for another painting at Paint Along Studios TV. We hope to see you again. Bye now.